Wise
with Aaron and Alexander.
Uncovering our authentic self
through self-awareness, conscious communication, and emotional responsibility. This next part of the conversation begins with myself walking into the studio and discussing a discomfort that I had with Alexander that day. This subject proved to be too long for one episode, and so it will continue on in the next episode. Our discussion led into aspects of the philosophy, such as acceptance, identifying our needs and wants, and how important it is to consider the cost of our wants to help us decide if moving forward is in our best self-interest. So now let's continue the conversation. So Alexander, this morning, before we started recording, I came in and I wanted to talk to you about a few issues I was having this morning on the way here. One, I woke up with a slightly sore neck on the back of my neck on the left-hand side. And then also I have this continuation with being frustrated because I feel like I never have enough time to do anything. And I know this. A lot of my awareness comes from being exposed to this kind of philosophy and being around you and at the sound journeys when you're talking, as well as our friendship. And for the last, I guess it's been a year and a half now. And so learning all of the things to look at, I guess in a way, has trained me to be more aware at the things going on in my life. It's just that I don't obviously have all the perceptions that you do. So that's why I've been able to know something's off and be able to start watching it. But then I obviously come to you whenever I need, I guess, a dissection of what my data is that I've come to.
Right. Yeah, and that's the way that we can utilize each other. Hopefully, as we move forward and continue to evolve, is to see that we all have different strengths and different weaknesses, and it's not a weakness to ask for help or a different, really just perspective is what I'm offering you and everyone is just a consider this type thing, because we want everyone, you included, to really find the answer for yourself. It's not about, we're not here to answer everyone's questions. We're really here to help people to learn to ask the right question. And, we talked on another segment about the word why. And I just had a client this morning that we got on that same thing about why, because she was experiencing frustration. And then I said, why is the first word that comes up, isn't it? Why are they like this? Why is this happening? And she was like, yeah, I drive myself crazy with that. And I go, only use that why internal. It's an exhausting energy external. And so our last segment, was around that. So when we looked at these different perspectives, such as something as minuscule or big as the neck discomfort, that has many different levels to it. And it's not that I like to change it from just focusing on the solution and what will make it feel better, but to expand that into what have I done to help create or manifest this, and to not do those things in the future. So part of that is recognition. And so we can become aware of something, like you said earlier, that you're aware of what you're doing that helps create this, but we're caught in a pattern or we're caught in a habit, habitual behavior to continue to do it. But the observation stage is very, very important, and it's one that most people rush through. And so if you can take the observation stage to catch yourself when you're doing something habitual that you want to change, and then instead of disciplining yourself or being upset at yourself, just continue to watch yourself go through that motion. and just go, I'm just going to watch myself doing this, and I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be accepting of this. Then as you do that just a few times and being accepting of it, the urge to change or the urge to fix that becomes more neutral, because acceptance makes everything come closer to that neutral state. And this is where I come back to learning to be in non-preference, and we'll have a deep discussion about that later on. So learning to and with the stuff that we were talking about your neck earlier, you brought up that you watching some numbers and some type of currency trading type stuff that you're playing around with, and noticing that we got into discussion about your attachment, your emotional attachment to it, and how it seemed like, every time the more you get attached to the outcome, it doesn't turn out well. And then we discussed that you do experience, both so-called positive results from that attachment and so-called negative.
Yeah, and there were so many different levels of our conversation, so I would like to try to get back to each segment and not forget. But I did want to say that having or knowing you and having this philosophy that allows, like, for instance, when I have an issue, I come to you and you offer some insight on it through your experiences, and I'm able to then expedite the process, because if I'm already watching myself and being aware of when it happens, the next step is to try to find out, like, why am I doing this? And like, what are the causes, and what else could be happening in my life that have led to those causes? And I feel like a lot of people get stuck there because they don't know where to go. And I know before I met you, I was on like the quote self-help kick, and I could not find there's so many out there, and it's so hard to know what is, which one's right. And none of them, at least in my search, nothing laid out a full philosophy that had a foundation where you could go back to it, and any issue you have, there's a foundation there that you could essentially figure it out yourself after a lot of experience and learning about the pillars and really concentrating and meditating on them and really understanding them as a whole. Eventually you can pretty much draw your own conclusion going back to them. But I think just having you in my life has expedited that for me, and I'm hoping that this is what this podcast will do for everybody else, is give them situations, and I don't mind using myself in a lot of examples, which I will get into why I think I have a neck ache after you told me it was the back of my throat chakra. And because through these examples where you're actually seeing a real person experience something secondhand and then seeing a perspective on why that happened, you could then either use other people in your life where, all around you that you see them having examples and observe, or if you have the gift to then look at yourself and see examples of stuff happening and then be able to draw conclusions from that based on what we discuss.
Yes. And one thing that I'd like to add with that is one of my teachers that I respect very much taught me to learn from those around you what not to do, rather than always searching for those to tell you what to do. And if you can use people and stay out of non-judgment, stay in non-judgment and acceptance and compassion, then when you see someone doing something that is not working or is causing discomfort for someone else or something like that, you can reflect on that and use that information to, help you in your process of evolving, to not always have to touch the fire to know that the fire is hot. And this was really the subject that we got on to when you first came in, because you were saying, I feel like I have to have the experience and go through it to truly understand it. And so you worded it a little bit better. Would you like to elaborate on that and kind of get your thought process behind that?
Yes, Alexander. So with me being a 3 as my primary number in the human design, like you were just talking about seeing everybody else as your teacher. And sometimes people can see that. And there are some times where I can see that. I can see people go through things. But most of the time, I need to experience something myself. And we were talking about how maybe the situation to where I can just observe something and learn the lesson is something that I've already learned or just needed a reminder of. But most of the time, when I see a situation where I probably where there's probably a lesson there, I have to jump in and put emotion into it for whatever reason. And I don't know whether that's good or bad. And once I learn the lesson there, being emotionally, creating that attachment to an outcome, then I'm able to quickly realize the lesson there, and I'm able to then see the situation as a whole as I back out. And then I can, it's almost like when you're kind of zooming into Google Maps and you're like kind of stuck in the situation, you can't see, like maybe you're zoomed into like Indiana and you can't see the other states. But once I learn the lesson there, or I see it for what it is, I'm able to then zoom out and see how it relates and connects to everything else. And then I kind of learn that lesson, and I never really need to go through that again because I never put myself in that situation again.
Right, but would you be in agreement to say that when you're doing that zooming out to get that, like stepping out, that's normally after some negative repercussion, which elicits a negative emotion? And so would you consider that it could be more useful to be able to get that wider vision without having to experience that negative emotion? Because there's an association here that we don't have to have the full negative experience to learn the information that's in the lesson.
Yeah, and we did talk a little bit about that, but maybe you can go into more detail about how a 3 could do that. Because in human design, the 3 is something that gets attracted to those types of situations. They're always in like the next best thing. And every time you talk to them, because I know that I've had some 3s in my life, and which obviously is like a mirror for myself, because I know this about myself, where there'll be something like, it could be like being vegan, and I'll be vegan for like 2 or 3 weeks, and like while I'm being vegan, I'm telling everybody, oh, it's like the greatest thing, you have to do it, I feel so great. And then the next time they see me, they're like, hey, you still vegan? I'm like, no, I'm on, now I'm doing the blood type diet, and that seems to be working out. So I mean, I don't know what it is, and so I don't know if that's a more a 3 thing, or if there are other profile numbers that could also, or any other types of people that could also experience that, or maybe you can go into more detail on like a broader scale.
Yeah, and you've got the double whammy here, because you have the 3 in the human design with the 3-5 profile, and then you have the 3 as well in the card system, the 3 of diamonds. So those 3s represent something slightly different in those two systems, although they carry a similarity. So the 3 is an artistic number, and in the human design, it also carries the restlessness. And in the cards, 5 carries more of the restless energy. So you do have the 3-5 in the profile, so it's still kind of sharing that. That's kind of the way those two systems cross-reference. So that restlessness is what seeks for that new excitement, for that new pleasure, for that new interest. And then as soon as it's seen, it wants to be experienced. It wants to stick their toe in it, and it wants to go like full force into it. But that is stepping off without any view of the cost of it. So I like to say, people of your design, this is what they're designed to do. But it's very similar to a warrior can get trained in killing tactics and survival tactics, but then they can go and put themselves in that situation without any tools, without any armor. So there's always a way to use your skill set and your design in a more, what I like to call, conscious way, or a more less damaging or less costful way. So with recognizing that interest is there, to stay in that excitement, because see, the slower that we dissipate that energy, the longer it lasts. So this comes into like any kid that, just gobbles up candy like right away, and hopefully as time goes on, we learn to refine our taste, and one little piece of chocolate can do for us what a whole bar used to do. So this is, once again, just becoming a connoisseur of life. I almost like that word connoisseur better than consciousness. So to realize that I don't see this clearly, whatever I'm stepping into. That's just always the first fact. I am excited. So Rumi says we should question what we want. So as soon as we have a want, we have to accept that I am not seeing this clearly. So let me just pause and still stay in this excitement, stay in that good feeling of that belly being warm and so excited about it. Then we might be useful to bring in the polarity and to just visualize without creating, but visualize through non-preference the possible cost of this venture. And so if this venture hypothetically is skydiving, then to have that thought and the realistic understanding that this is a life-threatening event, that's just a fact. That doesn't mean that any fear has not been evoked at this point. That's just a fact. There are many variables in this experience that could go wrong. That doesn't mean they're going to go wrong, but I'm going to accept all of those areas. Still, there's no fear. And then I'm going to feel, is this a good event for me to be part of today at this time, as specific as possible, but still working to stay out of non-preference, because just because you don't do it today doesn't mean you're never going to do it. But timing's very important. Right time, right place, right person, right duration. What you're going to hear is coming back to that over and over and over. So this is about making decisions in your life outside of your want system. And this is bringing it back to being concerned for the overall good of everyone involved. And that's what all of this system always comes back to. So if you can visualize the potentials and then you still feel safe, you don't carry any fear, then it's a good time to take a step and work at being in that juice every step of the way, rather than having a projected outcome of a goal, whether it's making money or putting another notch on your adrenaline belt or whatever it is. The more that want is, the more the cost is going to be.
Yeah, so for example, I recently got into the cryptocurrency market, and some of you out there may know what that is. Many probably don't yet because it's still pretty new. But I love numbers, and I love statistics, and I love money because I'm a diamonds. So it's like the perfect storm for me. And so I think what you just said, Alexander, about knowing the cost, I think I'm pretty good at doing that in most situations, especially when it comes to situations where I could die. Like I wouldn't go skydiving. I don't know. I may have gotten some of that paranoia from my mom, who is very paranoid about things like that. So I'm safe from those things. So when things are safe, sometimes I bypass that, and I'm just like, okay, well, I'm going to put some money in. I understand I could lose it, but sometimes I give myself more credit. You know, I'm probably smarter than the average person. I'm probably not going to lose it.
But
I'll be very careful.
Yes.
Yeah. So, it's easy for me to justify, I'll just put a little money in there and try it. Or sometimes I even read up on it. But most of the time I need to do it myself. I need to jump in, do it myself, learn because sometimes you can't learn everything about something until you're in that position where you have to, in order to continue being where you are. So in this situation, what we're talking about, and this goes back to my sore neck, is I got involved with a certain coin, and long story short, I was in this chat room, and we all had the same goal with the coin. Obviously, it's to raise, we want the price to go up. So we're all not going to sell. We have this idea where if whoever buys it is into this idea, we don't sell it, and then the supply becomes limited, and the price goes up, and the more the price goes up, the more people want it, but the supply is limited, so the price is only going to keep going up. And so the idea is there, but I felt that at one point, people didn't have the focus that I thought they had to, and I could see that the price was going to go down. And the community was not very happy with me because they pride themselves on being just positive, and if you say anything negative, they call it FUD, and I can't exactly remember what that means. But basically, it's you being negative, and they don't want any negativity. So they like kind of lashed out on me and basically said that they didn't want to hear it. And so I kind of just shut down, and I was like, okay, well, I got my message. I'm not going to say anything. And then a little while later, the coin, dropped half in value. So when I walked in today and told Alexander that, I kind of had this like pain in my neck, and I woke up an hour before I really got up because I went back to sleep, and I didn't have it. And so in that last hour was when something happened, and I have like a knot in my neck. He said, oh, and that's the back of your throat chakra. So I immediately went inside and was like, where was I not speaking my truth? And so what immediately came to my mind was this situation that happened, I think it was like 2 days ago, was where I was kind of shut down from speaking my truth, where I was really just trying to help because I'm there for the best interest of the coin, which benefits everybody, and I would hope that we're all in it together. But I kind of got backlash when I was trying to just bring something that I was seeing, and they saw it as a negative thing, and it could have been the way I was presenting my
But that
information.
wasn't your intention in any way, shape,
No,
or
definitely
form.
not. And again, we're over like a chat room, so it's not, that brings some difference in where like text can be, read as differently for different people. So again, not only being heard, but being misunderstood. And that, like we've talked about before, that I have a hard time when somebody misunderstands me, and like I had the purest intentions, and I know so many people go through this as well, because I know like mothers, they only want the best for their children,
Right.
and so many times that this happens where they only have the best intentions, and children,
it's been a huge challenge through
see it
my
a different
path as
way,
well. And anybody that's been in public service or here to be of service normally gets that. Nurses are in that a lot. They're just there to help, and they get backlashed and pushed away and cursed at and all types of things. So it is part of that process, and part of that I was bringing up around that neck is lots of times the emotion associated with that is guilt. So looking at the time that you took, this morning to lay back down, and then when you woke up, like if you felt like, no, that time was well spent, or no, that was good, or if there was a feeling of guilt, or I should already be moving, I should already be somewhere, I should already be being constructive, that's all playing into this. So it's connected to, that's why sometimes the energetic release, of course, doesn't show up until days later because the physical body is the most dense. So we can feel something on an energetic or emotional level, but it still take days or weeks or months or years even for it to manifest in the physical. That's why it can be very confusing. That's why I like to say, hey, let's look at all of these angles simultaneously. You think it's just a physical thing that maybe if not you per se, but most people just have a physical ache and they just want something to relieve the pain. But it's, let's see what led up to this.
Yeah, let me add, because my first thought when I woke up with the neck ache was like, man, I must be hovering over the computer in a weird way. But I had been, I've been doing this for a week or so, working hard on the computer on a web project, and it never happened then. So I think the average person would always go back to the physical and be like, I was just sitting there, or, just bent over the computer for too long or something. And maybe that was true, but there's a reason why I was tense there. Right. That kind of led to that.
Yeah, because the physical body can handle different strains depending on the looseness or the tenseness of the muscle. And so that's why stress is such a killer, because it tenses us up. And then we go and do something and we don't have the flexibility for the muscles to just do what they're designed to do. So this is my hypothesis of, athletes that can have like even a career-ending injury that visually just doesn't look like any big deal. Like a football player that's taken a hit, 100 hits worse than that, but this one knocked him out, or a basketball player or whatever. It still comes back to like what they like emotional state had they been in within the last 3 days or 72 hours or so. That's what I like to look for, is that 3-day swing, because that is going to play a part on how the emotion affects the energy field, how it affects the physical body, and what is contracted, and which is going to create injuries where something needs to be loose and flexible.
So that's why things like yoga and massages are really good, because it is the act of releasing that energy in the physical that's been stored up.
Yes, and actually, feeling, because lots of times that'll be uncomfortable to work on loosening those muscles, and it's a reminder, hey, pain is a great teacher and a great reminder. So I've had wonderful teachers to say, don't run from pain, but we are a culture that's what we've been taught, is to run from anything uncomfortable. And I'm here to say, learn to make love with the friction, because that's where the wellness and the healing is really at. And then once we go through that discomfort, then we have learned the lesson of, hey, let's not put our body, our energy field, our emotions through all of that. So that's why this work isn't about suppression of emotions. It's about respecting the emotions and giving them their due, but also teaching them that they're not running the show, but they're very much part of the show, and they're welcome to be here. So I just like to visualize it that all emotions are just like little children, and then consciousness is like the parent that is looking over all of the children, and that we accept that the children are going to jump up, the children are going to throw temper tantrums, the children are going to do what they do. But the role of the consciousness or the conscious parent is to soothe that child and ask them to please accept their place. And they're not here to run or direct the room. They're just here to be part of the room, part of the experience. So it's not a matter of suppression. It's not a matter of disciplining. It's communication. And so as we learn to communicate with ourselves, it reflects externally with how we're communicating with others, and vice versa. That's just a great mirror to know how we're doing with ourselves, as to how we are able to communicate with those around us.
And I think you were leading up to it a little bit ago, but talk about how physical pain, or when it gets to the physical, is really when it's like at the final stage.
Yeah, this is a new German medicine concept that I learned many years ago, and it's still open for observation from my perception. But one of the ways that they approach healing is that when it is in the physical body, they consider that it's in the final stage of the healing, because it's the most dense stage. So when someone gets cancer or something like that, they actually go, great, it's at the final stage of the healing, and after you get rid of it at this stage, you'll be through the whole process. And that changes the whole way that patient leaves that interaction and approach to their healing process, as opposed to how it's presented here in the U.S. typically by doctors. And I've had more than my share of experience with that. So I happen to, feel that is the case some of the time. There are no absolutes. So yes, I think it's useful to use that concept and to realize that is a possibility. But at the same time, I don't feel that is always the case, because sometimes a physical, some people would say that, like, if you break your arm, that happened, there's a message in that. And of course it depends on whether it's the left arm or right arm or what bone it is. There's a lot of information, and I work with people to help dissect that. But you still have to, you can get the arm in a cast and you can heal that bone, but if you don't go back and make sure that the emotional part was healed, more than likely there's going to be another situation that comes up, that it may not be the same break at the same area, but it could come through arthritis. It could come through many different types of illnesses that show up. So that's why, I just happen to feel that it's useful to to look at when we do have a physical issue, to look at it both, through the mental vision, through the emotional vision, through the energetic vision, all these different levels, to make sure that we're learning the lesson while we're working with comforting the physical body.
Yeah, and there's nothing that could be lost by just thinking about it. Even if you can't think of anything, at least you're practicing your awareness of your body and of your past and of your emotional state to see if there's some connection there. So even just kind of teaching yourself to have that level of awareness to go back and think, okay, well, if I'm really interested in healing and becoming the best person I can and becoming conscious and have better relationships, then it's in my best interest to start practicing this level of awareness with your physical and emotional state.
Yes, and part of the process of this podcast and this information is to complete this, I call it a 360-degree view, to where you're viewing the events and the people that come into your life from a very wide view, as opposed to like what we want from that person. See, if you don't have an agenda, if you don't have an expectation, if you're not looking at the outcome, then that's when you can truly be in the present moment and accept everything for the way that it is. But if any of that's there, if there's a want, if there's an agenda, if there's a focus on the end result, then all of that changes the energy of the whole experience. Then the emotional part comes, or the result comes, to whether you so-called got what you wanted or didn't get what you want. But lots of times people will sacrifice the process for that end result, and it's just basically gambling to see if you're going to win or if you're going to lose. And so people take different levels of those chances rather than focusing on enjoying every step of the process and allowing it to develop as it will develop. There's many different ways to manifest, and we'll get into the different types and how they all do this differently. But Aaron and I just happen to be the same type, so that's why we can share some similar stories and that type of thing.
Yeah, so circling back to having an attachment to outcomes. So in the situation I was speaking about, where I was in the chat room and they told me to stop talking about what I was talking about, my I guess my attachment there right at that point was that I wanted to be heard, because I felt like I had the best interest of the group. And then I guess my result that I wanted to happen was that they would then be like, okay, yes, you're right, we'll take care of it. But then zooming out to the big picture, my attachment to investing in that coin and being a part of that community was to obviously make money. But then what we were talking about before, and we can get into, because I think it goes real deep, is I feel like every time I put all this emotional energy into something, it just never works out. And this even goes to something we were also talking about, months ago, where being a generator, is just a theory that you had, but I've also noticed this pattern. Being a generator, where generators are supposed to put constant energy in motion and work towards their goal, where that's their way of, quote, manifesting something into fruition. So I've noticed that if I put all this emotional energy into something, like if I invest in this coin and I'm like, come on, coin, come on, and I like wish it, and I'm like, just make me some money, it just never happens. So and today I asked you, I'm like, what about everybody else that is also in that coin? How come their energy isn't overriding mine? Why am I always determining the outcome of this coin? Or at least it seems like it to me. So then we got on like, okay, well, maybe everybody who has to learn this type of lesson is in that coin, or different aspects of that lesson, because not everybody's getting the same exact lesson as me.
Different levels of the lesson.
Exactly. Yeah. So why don't we get on that part where we talk about how being attached to something on such an emotional level is usually not the way to go about it.
Yeah, because there's a difference between intention and expectation. And so when you have a want, as soon as you have a want, you create an expectation. That means that you have just signed up to experience the so-called positive of that experience and the so-called negative. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to experience them the same day, even the same year, potentially even the same lifetime if people follow that, or generations of the family. Because some things, if people will notice through family lineage, similar illnesses or similar gains or losses will happen skipping generations. And sometimes it'll skip a generation, and then the same disease or the same even beneficial outcome can happen. And we can say, oh, this happened, to your great-grandfather and blah, blah, blah. So whether you follow the past of past lives or family lineage, it's just different languages, but it results the same from an energetic standpoint. So that it is very useful to do everything you do with the purest of intention. To set up dominoes that are going to fall, there still takes that simple intention of that first push for that first domino to fall to create the rest of them to fall. But one should be happy whether, if they set up 500 dominoes, if just 250 of them fall and then there's one that fails, that could ruin someone's experience of that. When all they've got to go and do is one more simple push, and then they get 250 more dominoes to fall. Now, some people may say, well, that's not the objective. Well, it may just not have been the time for all 500 of them to fall. But if they would be happy with the 250, then the next time they set up the 500, they might fall. Or that person may have to set up 500 times before they get one of those to fall. And all I'm saying is consider the amount of attachment to the outcome to play a role in that. But when we just set our intention and we trust that if it's in divine order or if it's meant to be, then it will work out, and we stay in a neutral space, then we will find, I'm not saying that it will always work out. What I'm attempting to say is that the cost will be much, much less. And if the cost is less, then we have more energy to put toward so-called a beneficial intention or direction, because the focus here is all on how we are losing our energy. Anybody, even the most basic farmer, will let you know that if he feels good and he has a lot of energy, then his work is easier. So anytime we can save energy going through a process, it's going to benefit the project.
Yeah, so in my experience, I put a lot of wishing or expectation energy into this coin or investment, and where I believe it's going to yield something. So, but it's all that energy of like hope, that hope energy. And I know hope is important in the human experience, but it does yield some misbelief. Like it can get to like a belief system where you're like hoping something's going to happen, so you start believing that it is going to happen, and then when you get into belief, a lot of times you start to suspend your sense of logic.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to interject here and say, what if we added something to that hope? And just, I hope this works out, or I wish this to be the case. If we extended that to say, I hope that this works out if it's for my highest good, or I hope that this works out if it's for the highest good of everyone involved, then to me that changes that from such a personal want to a more of a trusting. So see, that I don't feel like there's anything wrong with hope, but it's what kind of hope is it? Is it selfish? Then it's going to have more of a cost. Is it trusting? Then it's probably going to have a different flavor to the trusting one.
Yeah, and to me, I mean, you didn't say that earlier, but to me that makes it all that much better, because it goes back to pillar one, which is everything is in divine order. So if you subscribe to that, I'm not saying that you're kind of giving up your free will, but you're saying almost like you're a servant to good, and you only want what is best for you. So if learning this lesson is best for you and is going to help you some point down the road where maybe something else could have happened to you, but because you learned this lesson, you got it, that it's not going to, and you can like kind of bypass or skip that, or may not have it or suffer as much because you've already learned some of the suffering. So, I mean, with you saying it that way, I mean, it puts a whole new light on it, because with investing all that emotional energy into it, of that hope and want, like you were saying, you get that polar opposite. So if your expectation does not yield in the way you expected it to, then you get that opposite emotion, which is like the opposite of hope is like despair. So you're like, man, why does this happening again? And then once you go down that road,
open the wide door,
and then you're probably leading, you're taking that energy into, like, what's your next investment? Then you're going to have doubts about your next investment. So you're just carrying that energy over and over throughout all your investments, where if you're saying, if this isn't the good of everybody, or the higher good of my life path or my lessons, then this will happen. Well, obviously there's a reason why you're doing it. So if you're surrendering and open to learning based on how it turns out, then there's no right or wrong. There's no cost there.
And this is very similar to someone saying, I want to have a bodybuilder's body, but I never want to be sore. I don't want to experience any discomfort, but that's what I want. And what I'm saying is this hope is, you can have that body. Are you willing to pay this cost? Sure. That doesn't have to be negative. The cost doesn't have to be negative, because when it's accepted, there's no negative to it. And lots of times there's a difference between, and we'll get into this later, acceptance and condoning. Just because I accept the way someone is does not mean that I condone their actions or condone the results that they've got in their life. But in order to be useful to the situation, the very first thing that I have to do is accept that person or that situation for exactly the way that it is. And the only way that I can do that is if I'm in completely non-preference, non-judgment. And there's been many teachers that have just simply said, judge not. There was no stipulations around it. It was real simple. Don't judge. So this is a way to still stay true to your values and one's own belief systems while being considerate and open to like where everyone else is around you. Because we help and we change people through example, not through words. There's so many words and so many teachings and so many teachers, so many books. We're in the information age. There's no shortage of information. There's a shortage of examples. So if you love the people that you love, then set the example. And the way that energy works is it's resonance. Things that resonate come closer together. So the more that you resonate and bring those energies closer together, the easier it is to manage the friction as it comes. So acceptance is a big part of this, and the difference between intention and expectations is huge. So we can go into like a project with expectations of the outcome, or we can go into it with an intention that I'm going to learn something one way or another here. And if I have too much of a preference, then I might not want to stick my toe into this, because the reward could be huge or the reward could be very bad, the cost rather. So just working to stay in that, and that phrase non-preference is a very wide subject. So the more that we bring it up, because if we have that same view that like even if something gets taken from us or stolen from us, we have the right to either get angry, try to get even, go steal something ourselves to get that money back, or to simply accept that maybe somebody needed that worse than I did. Not get into the mental justification of it all, but to live in that acceptance. Once again, I accept that happened. I don't condone that action. Therefore, I'm not going to react out of it, because any reaction is condoning it, even a forceful reaction against it, because opposites and polarity keeps things growing.
We appreciate your interest in self-growth, conscious communication, and continuing to ask the wise whys.
And remember, gradual changes over long periods of time equals lasting results.
The information in this podcast has been developed over 20 years by Alexander in his observation of his personal life, private practice, and professional environments. This information is meant for educational purposes only and is not suggested as a replacement for traditional therapies or medications. As a matter of fact, we suggest to not believe any of this information, nor any of the information out there in the world. Remember, knowledge plus experience equals wisdom. Seek the wise. We are looking forward to continuing to provide this information through this platform, and if you are drawn to support us, you can do so by the following. Sharing is caring. Share the podcast with like-minded individuals. Emotional responsibility and energetic wisdom can save the world. If you are drawn to support us monetarily, you can do so by visiting our Patreon page, where you can make a monthly donation in exchange for exclusive Wise perks. You can do this by visiting wise-wise.com/patron, Patreon. Next, you can head over to Alexander's website, where you can book private consultations in person, by phone, or on Skype. Find out more information on his live performances, class schedules, products, including birth chart analysis reports and music, and check out more information on his sound therapy tables. To do so, you can visit vibrotune.com, vibrotune.com. Finally, if you have been searching your entire life for consciously created apparel featuring the Wise logo apparel, Alexander themed clothing, or other alternative perspective designs, you can head over to Verities Apparel, where you can find all that and more. That is veritiesapparel.com, VERITEESAPPAREL.com. We want to thank you for being part of this journey.